quick introductions. We have Sarah McWhirter. She trained at a large commercial firm once she had qualified as a solicitor before moving to specialise in clinical negligence and personal injury work, initially for a defender, and latterly practised exclusively in pursuer clinical negligence work. Prior to coming to the bar, she was head of Clinical Negligence Scotland and principal lawyer and a partner at Slater and Gordon. She was ranked Band 1 by Chambers and Partners in 2025 for pursuer clinical negligence, and she is also a course organiser for the personal injury course for the University of Aberdeen's Diploma in Legal Practice. And we've got Tony Convery. Prior to Devlin, Tony spent 5 years as a qualified solicitor at Brodie's LLP, where he had a wide-ranging practice for both contentious and advisory work. He's got considerable experience across both public law and commercial litigation, which are areas he intends to focus on at the bar, and we may well touch upon that later on. Tony has also acted as a research assistant in leading textbooks and published legal commentary in his own right. He tutors at the University of Glasgow, and he will call to the bar, as the Lord Reed Scholar for 2025. And so we'll kind of kick off with really just a question for both of you, which is what initially drew you both to transition from private practice, where you were both obviously a solicitor for a number of years, to come to the bar. And I'll start with Sarah.
Thanks, Alan, and thank you very much for the opportunity today to speak and to introduce ourselves to as the latest recruits to Ampersand. So I was in private practice as a solicitor for about 10 years, and when I became a partner a few years ago, I found that my day-to-day job was starting to transition away from the law and more into becoming a manager. And in short, I'm really just a bit of a geek, and I really enjoy the law. I like reading the law, advising on the law, seeing how the law is going to develop. And I missed that when I started to move more into managing the team. And so for me, coming to the bar was the obvious choice because it let me go back to the black letter law, back to interpreting that, to using it to the advantage of my clients.
Yeah, good. Yeah, no, thanks. I think, and to be honest, I think that's echoed by a lot of people that join the bar from what I've heard over the years. And how about yourself, Tony?
Hello, everybody, and good to be with you. I think I'm going to echo you and echo you do that, Alan, because it's pretty similar themes for me as well. For me, coming to the bar is an opportunity to do the bits of the job I love, but do them better and do them more often. I really enjoy giving legal advice, really enjoy being on my feet, representing clients' interests. And as I progressed as the solicitor, I was concerned I was doing less of that and more of the things I didn't love as much. And I also wanted to test myself out against the most complex and testing cases. So those are the things that drew me to come to the bar.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Good. We're going to talk now, and just before we kind of really get into the nitty-gritty of deviling, what surprised you most about the transition from the process between qualifying as a solicitor and coming to the bar? And Tony, I'll just state to you for now, if that's okay.
Sure. I think probably the standout thing for me is quite how many stages in the process there are and quite how long it can take. So once you've got your mind set on becoming an advocate, and there's quite a process to undertake even before you get to the dibbling stage. Thinking of my own timelines, I first applied for a scholarship to assist me in dibbling back in April 2023. I also started thinking about Dibble Masters then. There were then interviews for scholarships. There were then formal notification procedures for telling people you're coming to the bar. So that involves your petition being presented and the thing people know about is your name going up outside Parliament House. All the entrance exams in 2024. So there are very good reasons for that sequencing and the duration of the run-up, but it is quite a run-up. And I think that's one of the things that before you start exploring what the process is can be quite surprising.
Yeah, exactly. And it's actually very nerve-wracking when your name goes up at the door of Parliament House. I think that's the point where you have to really make sure everybody knows that he needs to know. And Sarah, yourself.
So unlike Tony, I had a quicker run up to commencing practice because of the personal circumstances I've touched on. I think my petition went up very late in the day, I thought, okay, I think now's the time to take the plunge to go to the bar. Looked up the deadlines, realised they were imminent, and stepped on the roller coaster, and there we were. We were off quite quickly. But then, like Tony, after your petition goes up, the process does take quite a long time and is quite arduous. The first thing that surprised me was the entrance exams and just how many different areas of law you need to familiarise yourself with, especially if you've come from a niche area of practice. That's quite daunting, to have to look at the rules of evidence and procedure across the whole sphere of civil law and also criminal law took quite a bit of studying, which is tough alongside having a demanding job and family commitments. So I really would encourage anybody thinking of embarking on this process to set some time aside for those exams, because they are tough. I think the other thing that's strange about the process is when you tell your employer that you're leaving to go to the bar, firstly, they might already know because somebody's seen your name up on the court walls. But secondly, they're a potential instructing agent. And so if you're in a notice period, normally at your job, you might allow yourself to relax, but absolutely not when you're coming to deviling. You just want to impress people as much as possible, whether that's the firm you're at, people you're on the opposing side of, or other firms. You start to think of it as a period to showcase yourself, not to let yourself relax at all. So that's quite an odd part of the transition process.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you there. And we'll now look in for spend a few minutes looking at deviling itself. And deviling is often described as a rite of passage. And what does a typical day look as a devil during your deviling period, both the classwork you do and the time you spend with your various devil masters? And I think you'll both probably want to kind of touch on various points of this. So I don't know which one of you want to go first to kind of deal with maybe the classroom side of it first.
Shall I take the classroom and you can take the Devil Master stuff together?
That sounds good. On you go, Tony.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think the thing that stood out for me in terms of the classroom is that it can be quite intense. And I say that. Let's say that someone who's not a stranger to hard work, but there is very often written work to be done in the evenings. There's a lot of oral advocacy, and it involves all of us experiencing and practicing in areas that we've not previously been familiar with. So it's an intense process, but because of that, it's amazing how much you learn. And you learn not only from instructors, so qualified advocates who come in and help you learn. You learn from one another because you get to see each other and presented orally, and you get to learn from their mistakes and learn from the things they're good at. And so it's an enjoyable experience, it's an intense experience, and I think you learn quite a lot of it, and maybe more of it than I thought I would.
Yeah, good. And Sarah, yourself then on the other side of things with Devil Masters.
Yes, so the time with the Devil Masters, I'd say, is really what you make of it. And the onus is quite a lot on the devil to make sure you're getting the best part of that experience. And I think there's two different ways you can approach it. You can have set times with all your Devil Masters. So perhaps to explain what I mean by that, you normally have a principal Devil Master who you spend most of your time with, and they have to be a civil practitioner. And you also must have a criminal Devil Master who you spend 4 weeks with. And then many of us choose to have one or more subsidiary Devil Masters to gain a different type of experience. So some people choose to do set blocks with each Devil Masters, or the approach I took was more ad hoc to gain experience of particular areas with each of my Devil Masters. So I would tend to work on certain cases with them if they were areas I wanted to gain experience in. For the first few months, I chose to focus on written work. And so I was often at home or in the library honing my drafting skills. And that was really because of the exams in February. 2 of those are written. You have to draft a summons or another initiating court document and also an opinion. And because most of my work as a solicitor was court of session work, I don't think I drafted court pleadings for nearly 10 years. since I was a trainee. So I knew I had to really focus on those skills. And so for me, it was after the February exams that I started to go into court more, to see a clinical negligence proof, which was really exciting, and to spend quite a lot of time with my criminal devil master, gaining that different type of experience.
Yeah, good, good. I think that's a really important point, actually, is whether you're doing blocks with devil masters or in fact it's more kind of ad hoc so that you can catch the devil master who's doing the stuff that you're maybe most interested in or need the experience in. And of course, it can't all land perfectly during the period of time you might be with them. So it's there's definitely a wee bit of luck involved in that and a bit of planning. What is one skill that you think you've honed during deviling that you now feel you'll be able to rely on? That maybe didn't feature when you were a solicitor, and I'll stay with you, Tony, for that.
Okay. I may not fully answer your question, and I think I'm going to talk about something that did feature when a solicitor, but has featured more during deviling, and I can expect to feature more in the future, and that's oral advocacy. So I did a fair bit of oral advocacy as a solicitor, including against opponents represented by counsel. So it wasn't something that was unfamiliar to me. What I've really valued in the deviling process is the opportunity to strip oral advocacy, as with everything else, at the basis. So Zira and I are part of a cohort of 29 devils, I think. And we are a broad bunch from some very recent trainees to experienced solicitor advocates who've personally conducted multiple hearings in the High Court. But what I've really enjoyed actually is that from an oral advocacy perspective, our background was back to day one. We were spending a lot of time seeing the basics, having a recordings, what you're actually being critiqued for it, and might be a little frustrating sometimes. And it's also really helpful. And really, there's no other point in my career where I've had the opportunity to have that kind of intensive feedback and intensive focus on oral advocacy. So from my perspective, to answer your question, Alan, that's one skill I do feel I have really owned, and I'm looking forward to relying upon it a lot.
Yeah, excellent. And Sarah, how about you?
I think for me, it's been how to deal with an unfamiliar area of law. So having come from a niche practice, I broadly knew how to approach most of the cases that came onto my desk. But during deviling, you have to become quickly familiar with a range of different types of cases. So I suppose I learned to become comfortable with the uncomfortable quite quickly. The most extreme version of that being criminal law. That's not something I've any experience of, but my weeks with my criminal devil master have been some of the best weeks of deviling. And it's been interesting to see the transferable skills that you can take from a different area and translate into what you hope your own practice will be. And one of my civil masters has civil devil masters has quite a diverse practice and often has some very unique cases coming across their desk. So those tasks were particularly interesting at often having to go back to the literature to find out even where to start before you begin drafting. So that's been a really good experience.
Yeah, excellent. And so really, on that note, when you call, what areas do you think are likely to feature in your practice as an advocate, considering your background and experience? And Tony, I'll start with you and I'll have a follow-up question for you, and then I'll go across to Tina.
I think I've been doing order of questions. I've let the cat in the bag down this one already, and my areas of focus in the bar I'm intending to practice in are in public law and in commercial litigation, but both of those pretty broadly.
Yeah, good. And on that note, what do you think are the kind of hot topics in your area of practice that you feel are emerging that practitioners ought to have in front of mind and may well feature as part of your practice as you become an experienced advocate?
So on the public law side, I think a real hot topic just now is impact assessment, and that's across a variety of kind of sub-areas of public law. So some people watching might have heard of the Finch case, where the Supreme Court said some very radical things about what should happen in environmental impact assessment. I think the recent Supreme Court case for Women Scotland, which was about sex and gender issues, a lot of the implications of that are going to be played out in quality impact assessments. We also are dealing in Scotland and the incorporation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the legislation providing for that also provides for impact assessment. So I think that's one of the hot topics, and it's the kind of area where I think impact assessment done well can lead to good decision making, but also done well or not, and it's vulnerable to challenge by people who don't agree with the outcome or the process that's taking place. On the commercial litigation side, I can be quick. I think I can think this, giving you the same answer anytime over the last decade. Prescription, which many of the people watching will know, is about when obligations are extinguished by operation of law, has been a minefield for the courts for many years. We've had some fairly recent legislation that is being commenced, and it's also a topic that's went down to the Supreme Court then. So, as ever, introspection will watch this space.
Good one. Excellent. And yourself, Sarah, in both of those questions, in whichever order you prefer.
I've probably also let the cat out the bag. So my main background was in personal injury and clinical negligence, and I hope to keep a reparation practice. But to expand into what I'm calling healthcare litigation, anything that uses the vocabulary of a medical case is something that I'd really like to practice in. In terms of a hot topic, I know it's cliched for those in the clinical negligence sphere, but I think the decision of the Supreme Court in the case of Paul is still very much a hot topic, and one which the courts in Scotland haven't yet had the opportunity to grapple with. I say yet as I know there are some cases going through the courts at the moment which are seeking to grapple with some of those issues. For those listening who are not familiar with the decision, the case of Paul was about who can be classed as a secondary victim in a case involving medical negligence as opposed to an accident case. And I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of what a medical accident is, who can be classed as a secondary victim, and indeed whether the class of primary victims can be extended. And I think there's some really exciting arguments from both the pursuer and defender perspective, and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting stuck into some of those cases on both sides.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. And it's been really insightful. I think this discussion's been really useful in terms of giving a bit of insight into deviling, your reasons, decisions for coming to the bar, plus some real good detail on why you're coming to the bar and what you'll be doing when you're here.